The day Daniel Cross signed the marriage contract, the paper trembled more than his hand, because the room itself felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see how low a man could be made to bow before money. The glass walls of the 42nd floor reflected a city that never cared who was crushed beneath it, and in the center of that cold, polished space stood a poor single father with worn shoes, a borrowed suit, and a past that still ached like an unhealed wound. Across from him sat Evelyn Hartman, the iron-willed CEO whose name ruled headlines and boardrooms, a woman who believed power was proof of worth. She looked at Daniel not as a man, not as a father, but as a transaction, and in that moment, she belittled him with a smile sharp enough to cut, certain that this $5 million marriage deal had bought her complete control. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of people the world overlooks, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because your presence here matters more than you know. Daniel had not always been poor, and he had not always been invisible. Years earlier, his life had been simple and warm, built around late-night laughter, shared dreams, and the small apartment where his daughter Lily learned to walk. Then came the accident that took his wife and left silence echoing through every room. Grief hollowed him out, and responsibility filled the space it left behind. He worked 2 jobs, then 3, doing anything honest that paid enough to keep Lily fed and in school. But the city was ruthless to men who could not afford mistakes, and one medical emergency after another drained his savings until there was nothing left but debt and exhaustion. When Lily fell ill with a rare condition requiring treatment he could never afford, Daniel did what desperate parents have done throughout history. He swallowed his pride and searched for a miracle. The miracle came disguised as humiliation. Evelyn Hartman needed a husband on paper, someone with no social power, no family ties, and no risk of challenging her authority. Her board demanded stability, the media demanded a love story, and she demanded control. Daniel needed money to save his child. Their worlds collided in a contract thick with clauses and cold language, promising him $5 million in exchange for 3 years of marriage, silence, and obedience. Evelyn made sure he understood his place, reminding him that this deal was charity disguised as convenience, that without her signature his daughter's future was a question mark. Daniel listened, nodded, and signed, because a father's love is louder than pride. Life inside Evelyn's world was a study in contrast. Her penthouse overlooked the city like a throne above ants, filled with art chosen by advisors and furniture no one ever relaxed on. Daniel moved through those spaces quietly, aware of every stain on his past and every judgment in the eyes of a circle. The media painted him as lucky, a nobody lifted by a powerful woman, while employees whispered about the poor single dad who dared enter the CEO's orbit. Evelyn never missed a chance to remind him that he was replaceable, that the money had bought his silence and his gratitude. And yet, every night, Daniel returned to the small hospital room where Lily slept, holding her hand, telling her stories about stars and courage, promising her that tomorrow would be better. What Evelyn never asked was who Daniel had been before loss carved him down to survival. She never wondered how a man so quiet could be so steady, or why doctors listened when he asked questions about Lily's treatment. She did not know that Daniel had once been a brilliant systems architect, a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos, a man who walked away from a rising career to be present for his family. When life collapsed, he had not lost his intelligence, only the platform to use it. In the long nights beside Lily's bed, he studied medical logistics, hospital inefficiencies, and the way funding vanished into administrative cracks. He saw problems not as walls, but as systems waiting to be redesigned. As weeks turned into months, Evelyn's empire began to show hairline fractures. A major acquisition stalled, investors grew uneasy, and a data breach threatened to expose weaknesses her competitors would feast on. The boardroom pressure mounted, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt the edge of fear. She tightened her grip on control, snapping at executives and pushing impossible deadlines, convinced that force could bend reality back into her favor. Daniel watched from the margins, absorbing everything, understanding more than anyone realized. He saw the same inefficiencies he had seen in hospitals, the same arrogance that blinded leaders to simple solutions. The turning point came quietly, without applause or drama. Late one night, as Evelyn slept in a different wing of the penthouse, Daniel sat at a desk overlooking the city, Lily's breathing steady in his memory like a metronome of purpose. He began to write, not a plea, not a complaint, but a blueprint. He mapped out a restructuring plan for Evelyn's struggling division, identifying redundancies, security gaps, and a path to regain investor confidence. He did not do it for recognition. He did it because fixing broken systems was who he was, and because somewhere deep inside, he refused to let the world define him by his lowest moment. When the crisis finally exploded into public view, Evelyn was unprepared. Stock prices wavered, journalists circled, and the board demanded answers she did not have. In a moment of desperation masked as authority, she reviewed every possible option, until she found Daniel's document waiting in her inbox, sent without a subject line, without explanation. What she read shook her in a way no insult or threat ever had. The plan was brilliant, precise, and terrifyingly effective. It addressed problems she had ignored for years and offered solutions that required humility instead of dominance. For the first time, she saw Daniel not as a burden, but as a force she had underestimated. Implementing his plans saved the company. Investors returned, confidence stabilized, and the narrative shifted from failure to resilience. The media credited Evelyn's leadership, as they always did, but within the boardroom, a quiet truth settled in. The poor single dad they had dismissed had outperformed their most expensive consultants. Evelyn felt something unfamiliar tightening in her chest, a mix of gratitude, guilt, and the realization that power had blinded her to human worth. As Lily's health improved, thanks to uninterrupted treatment and a father who never left her side, Daniel felt a weight lift that he had carried for years. He no longer woke up in fear of tomorrow. He began to stand a little straighter, speak a little more freely, not out of defiance, but out of self-respect. Evelyn noticed the change, and it unsettled her more than his brilliance ever had. She had built her life on dominance, believing that money defined value, only to be saved by a man she had reduced to a contract. The true climax came not in a boardroom, but in a quiet decision. When the final year of their contract approached, Evelyn expected Daniel to negotiate, to demand more money, more security, more status. Instead, he prepared to walk away. He had used the money not only to save his daughter, but to quietly invest in a healthcare technology startup focused on accessibility and efficiency, using the very principles he had applied to Evelyn's company. His venture began to attract attention, not because of hype, but because it worked, improving lives in ways that numbers could not fully capture. Evelyn realized then that the $5 million deal had never bought Daniel. It had only revealed him. The man she had belittled had transformed desperation into purpose, humiliation into impact. And in doing so, he left her facing a mirror she could not shatter, one that showed her the cost of arrogance and the power of humility. As this story draws close, if it has touched your heart, if it has reminded you that strength often wears the face of quiet endurance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to believe in unseen heroes, and subscribe to the channel to support stories that honor resilience and humanity. Just before the ending, take a moment to comment below and tell us whether you believe true power comes from wealth or from character, because your voice adds meaning to this story. In the end, Daniel Cross did not leave with applause or revenge. He left with his daughter's hand in his, a future built on integrity, and the knowledge that no contract could ever define his worth. Evelyn Hartman remained at the top of her empire, but something within her had shifted, a seed of respect planted too late to claim credit, but early enough to change her path. And somewhere between the glass towers and hospital rooms, a truth lingered, quiet but unbreakable, that kindness is not weakness, that second chances can rewrite destinies, and that the most powerful moves are often made by those the world never sees coming. The story did not truly end when Daniel Cross walked out of the glass tower with his dignity intact, because some endings are only doors quietly opening into harder, deeper chapters. In the weeks that followed his departure from Evelyn Hartman's world, the city kept moving as it always had, indifferent and loud, but Daniel felt something rare growing inside him, a calm certainty that he no longer had to beg life for mercy. Lily's laughter returned in small bursts at first, then in full, careless waves that filled their modest new home with light. Every pill she swallowed, every checkup that ended with cautious smiles, reminded him that sacrifice had meaning, even when it was wrapped in shame at the time it was made. Daniel's healthcare startup did not explode overnight, and that was exactly why it survived. He chose patience over spectacle, impact over ego. He hired people who had been overlooked like him, single parents, immigrants, burnt-out professionals who still cared. They worked in a small office that smelled of cheap coffee and stubborn hope, building systems that reduced hospital wait times, cut unnecessary costs, and redirected money toward actual patient care. Slowly, clinics began to notice. Then hospitals. Then regional networks. Daniel refused flashy headlines, but results spoke louder than any press release ever could. Meanwhile, Evelyn Hartman found herself surrounded by silence she could not buy away. Her company was stable again, profitable even, but the victory felt hollow. She watched Daniel's name appear in industry briefings and innovation panels, always mentioned with respect, never with pity. People spoke of him as a visionary who understood both numbers and human pain. Each mention was a quiet reminder of how she had once looked down on him from a place of assumed superiority. For the first time in her life, Evelyn questioned whether control had cost her something irreplaceable. At night, when the city lights blurred into distant stars beyond her windows, Evelyn replayed moments she had dismissed as irrelevant: Daniel's patience, his restraint, the way he never asked for sympathy even when she offered him none. She began to see her own past more clearly: the childhood that taught her power was safety, the mentors who rewarded ruthlessness, the fear that kindness would make her weak. Understanding did not excuse her actions, but it cracked the armor she had lived inside for decades. Their paths crossed again not by design, but by consequence. A global healthcare conference brought innovators and executives into the same orbit, and Daniel's work earned him a standing ovation he never sought. He stood on stage not as a victim-turned-hero, but as a father who had learned how broken systems break people. Evelyn watched from the audience, unseen, as the room rose to honor the man she had once reduced to a signature on a page. Applause thundered around her, but what echoed loudest was the truth she could no longer deny: that greatness does not announce itself with dominance, it reveals itself through service. Daniel did not look for Evelyn after that moment. He did not need closure from her, because he had already found peace within himself. Forgiveness, he learned, was not something you grant to free others, but something you practice to free your own future. He focused on Lily, on building a life where stability was not a luxury but a foundation. They planted flowers on their small balcony, naming each one after a dream Lily wanted to chase: astronaut, painter, doctor. Daniel watered them every morning, knowing some would bloom and some would not, and loving them all the same. Evelyn's transformation came slowly, painfully, and without applause. She began restructuring her company not for profit alone, but for purpose, funding initiatives that mirrored the principles Daniel had lived by. She listened more. She interrupted less. People noticed, though few understood the quiet reckoning behind it. She never reached out to Daniel, not out of pride, but out of respect for the distance he had earned. Some lessons, she realized, are not meant to be apologized away, only lived differently going forward. As years passed, Daniel's company expanded internationally, improving care for millions who would never know his name. Lily grew stronger, her illness becoming a chapter in her story rather than the title of it. Daniel remained humble, aware of how close he had once been to losing everything, and how easily life could have gone another way. He taught Lily not to fear poverty or wealth, but to understand people, because circumstances change, but character endures. If this continuation of the story has stirred something inside you, if it reminded you that quiet perseverance can outlast cruelty and that true success is measured in lives uplifted, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who feels unseen, and subscribe to support stories that honor humanity over status. Before the ending, leave a comment and tell us which moment in Daniel's journey moved you the most, because your reflection completes this story. In the final frame of this cinematic journey, there is no grand confrontation, no dramatic confession, only a man and his child standing beneath an open sky, breathing freely at last. The deal that once defined Daniel Cross fades into insignificance, replaced by a legacy built on compassion, resilience, and quiet courage. And somewhere, far above the city streets, the idea lingers that even when the world belittles you, your next move, made with integrity and love, can change everything.